Okay, today we're going to discuss cargo cults. It's a term that's fairly modern, really after World War II, where due to cargo shipments going all the way through the islands leading back and forth into the China Sea for the battle against Japan and Midway and all those things that you hear about, the Seabees went there and literally could make within a week or two an actual air base that could land cargo planes like big RC-135s, which look somewhat like this plane here but larger, and would drop off cargo and then leave and come back and do that repeatedly to set up cargo for attacks and things like that. It's something that these people had never seen before, and they came out the other end of it with quite a few odd beliefs, especially to us in the Western world. But you can probably, once we go through this, see how this happened, and we'll also make connections to other times this has happened. You'll probably be able to do that yourself just in watching. First, we have Robert Sepper talking a little bit, and then we have the presentation that he has that's been done off of a BBC type program. Let's listen.
Cargo cult is a name given to several religions which arose by tribal societies that came into contact with Western civilizations. These religions started when the technologically primitive hunter-gatherers saw Western manufactured goods for the first time, such as radios, clothing, and metals offloaded from planes, and called them cargo, which they concluded must come from their ancestors in paradise. The tribe's people believed that their deities and deceased relatives created these manufactured goods for them, but the white foreigners stole it instead. For this reason, the cargo cults began rituals around imitating what they saw the Westerners do, such as build runways for planes to land, so that they could attract the items that their ancestors allegedly created and the white people stole.
So if you're paying attention, once they saw these nice shiny new things that they didn't know what they were, their equation in their mind, because they'd always lived on this island out in the middle of nowhere and didn't know the rest of the world really existed, they did a thing like coveting in the Bible, as you'd say, and decided to think that it couldn't be that there's these advanced people that has all this stuff that made it, but actually they had somehow intercepted this shipment that was supposed to make them fly around in these airplanes and have all this nice stuff from their ancestors and not from the white people. So if you look here at the map, you can see in the right-hand side there's just a stretch of islands that goes off where you barely see the E of Easter Island, the Pitcairn Islands, French Polynesia, which is gorgeous, the Cook Islands, named after Captain Cook. But the area that we start to be really in concern with is this Melanesian type of area. But let's just say now that this happened all through these islands and many more places. We'll get into that later. But let's watch this presentation here.
Along this great ocean route, 10 cargo planes connect Hong Kong with Australia. They land each day at Port Moresby, and the cargo cult has its temples almost everywhere nearby. This is one. Its altar is standing 9,000 feet above sea level. The dummy plane is at the edge of the landing strip. At the other end, the control tower. The natives of the Rozo and Mikeo tribes are waiting for some plane to land on their strip, attracted by the bamboo model. They believe that planes come from paradise. Their ancestors sent them. But the white man, a crafty pirate, manages to get his hands on them by attracting them into the big trap of Port Moresby.
You see, they actually believe that this island here, it's the biggest one that they have in that little archipelago here, And so that's the only thing that could be going on in this whole great big world of ours. And again, white people are crafty devils that have stolen something else. You hear this comment made by all kinds of people. We'll get into that a little bit later as this gets exposed here and showing you the way that primitive people start to act and react towards this during a first meeting, as per se.
Build your plane too, says the cargo cult doctrine, and you build your plane too, says the cargo cult doctrine, and wait with faith. Sooner or later, your ancestors will discover the white man's trap and will guide the planes on your landing strip. Then you will be rich and happy. They wait, motionless, searching the sky.
Now, in other words, they can no longer feel happy being who they are, where they are after seeing this. That's the indication they give, and that they'll only be happy if their ancestors somehow bring them some of the special white things, which in actuality is just white people bringing things to them, and they shared with them whenever they got to the islands to be friendly with the natives and so on. In fact, later we'll show where they talked about, hey, you know, we're cool, watch out for the other guys, and so on. And that's taken off into a cult, into an actual religion here. Just a side note, these people's IQ hovers around 65.
There is no other world beyond these mountains, so the large birds that roar up there above the clouds cannot but come from paradise. There are only their ancestors in paradise. Therefore, only their ancestors can have built the planes. The spirits of the deceased cannot know the white men. Therefore, all those wonderful things that the planes carry were meant for their descendants.
Hopefully you can hear this pretty good. I know I'm recording it secondhand here. But so you can see the mentality and how they've built a fake plane that if they threw it off of a cliff wouldn't do anything. It's just a mimicking. In some way, it's kind of sad. Things like this are the reason that we decided to no longer interfere with people after what we dealt with black people being so primitive and so different than all the rest of the old world, as per se. It ended up becoming to where maybe we should leave them alone. These type of things, though, this type of program used to be shown weekly, like National Geographic and so on, up through my childhood into my growing ups. And then all of a sudden there was this change. They didn't want to show it anymore because it showed people that were not in a favored light. That was kind of the expression you give, and you were like, you mean they're not as advanced and so on? That was the neat thing about the colors of the world and all the things that still exist, but you're kind of making that not exist. One wonders just quickly here how many millions of dollars it would take to get to these people to be happy, and then at that point, when everything falls apart due to their own unknowing knowledge of how to do anything that's in front of them, how that would become not happy, and then it would just become an incredible burden. This only happened because emergency time in World War II, they wouldn't be trying to do this. They had already, kind of scouted things out somewhat. People had been there before a few times, but in this case here, most of these natives had never seen anybody before, and so you can see what starts to come out of the idea where they build this thing on the mountains, but they come out of the mountains, and later we'll show how they come out of the mountains and down to the coast, where these people really are not a coastal people necessarily.
They've left the mission. They've forgotten their prayers. And here they are, waiting faithfully at the doorway to the sky.
Cargo cults are marked by a number of common characteristics, including a myth that the material wealth was stolen from them by the white men that intercepted the manufactured goods created by their ancestors meant for them. According to these myths, these goods are intended for the local indigenous people, but the foreigners have unfairly gained control of these objects through malice or mistake. Thus, a characteristic feature of cargo cults is the belief that spiritual agents will, at some time in the future, give much valuable cargo and desirable manufactured products to the cult members.
So you can see here how right off the bat there's a greed to the situation, but also to justify it in their mind it's from their ancestors, so you owe it to us. In fact, you owe us so much because you've gotten so much from our ancestors, and that really couldn't be farther from the truth. We no more really knew that you existed than you knew that we did, but at that same point, we ended up bringing some stuff here to help ourselves out, bounced off your island, gave you some of it, and now that you've seen and realized there's a whole great world out there, or no, not really. They don't know where the white man really lives and stuff. We'll kind of see that a little bit later here, but this is Robert Sepper here that's doing this part here, overlooking LA's beaches and stuff as he talks. He usually does this, or has a ukulele in the background, or he's feeding ducks, where he finally got the white one to come to him and stuff. But let's just continue here. I don't mean to actively steal Robert's work here off of this. I just want to show you something and the connectives and talk through it. And though I don't agree with 100% of what Robert says and a lot of his, I'm in concurrence on this video and many of his. You ought to take a look at his site on Robert Sepper or under Atlantean Gardens. He eventually posts different videos on each one. But you can see these beliefs that these people have, where because you showed up once, now we want that real bad. In fact, we figured out a way in our minds to think that you owe it to us. It gets worse than that, but let's just continue here and take a look at this in a little more depth so we can get a little more understanding.
This widely known period of cargo cult activity occurred among the Melanesian islands in the years during and after World War II. The vast amount of military equipment and supplies that both sides airdropped or airlifted to the airstrips to troops on these islands meant drastic changes to the lifestyle of the islanders, many of whom have never seen outsiders before. Manufactured clothing, medicine, canned food, tents, weapons, and other goods arrived in vast quantities for the soldiers, who often shared some of it with the islanders, who were their guides and hosts. With the end of the war, the military abandoned the air bases and stopped dropping cargo. In response, charismatic individuals developed cults among the native tribes that promised to bestow on their followers deliveries of food, arms, jeeps, clothing, and other material goods. The cult leaders explained that the cargo would be gifts from their own ancestors, that the white men could not create this on their own, but stole it from them, and that one day these items and technology would find their way to the primitive tribes people. In attempts to...
So, I don't know if you're aware or not of hearing Afrocentrics or not, but it's one of the reasons they claim they used to be the Egyptians and that Greeks got all their knowledge, like they were twiddling thumbs until Egypt showed up. That's what their thoughts are somehow. Well, they have to do that to justify their point. For their justified point is to say, well, we taught y'all everything. And then, if anybody says something like, well, what happened? Then they get real mad. And of course it shows that it's not the people that are talking at this point, but they're trying to usurp some other people and claim they used to be somebody else other than themselves, to kind of justify in their mind what's going on in front of them, when everything in front of them and everything that they want and wish they had was all made by Caucasians. That happens in a modern time, but this opening scene of hanging at a fence happened in Nubia and caused a lot of problems to Egyptians, and I've made a couple of videos about that when people kept mouthing off and lying about who the Nubians were. And it also happened in South Africa, where the apartheid fence used to be, whenever these primitive people showed up there and they really, really wanted that stuff that was supposedly from their ancestors and had gotten stolen, and that's why they wanted it. Now, many people could say a lot of things about that, but a lot realized that that was not the way to have actually done it, and we've learned that lesson in America quite well, which we'll get into here shortly.
To get cargo to fall by parachute or land in planes or ships again, islanders imitated the same practices they had seen the military personnel use. Cult behaviors usually involved mimicking the day-to-day activities and dress styles of the U.S. soldiers, such as performing parade ground drills with wooden rifles, carving headphones from wood, and waving the landing signals while standing on the runways. They even lit signal fires and torches to light up the runways and lighthouses at night. The John Frum cult, one of the most widely reported and longest lived, and started before the war and became a cargo cult afterwards, where cult members worshipped certain unspecified Americans having...
I guess that's a good place to break in. So you can see what they do is they start off at a certain point and then they decide to start mimicking. One good thing that can be shown from what we just saw, which was footage from the 1980s, I believe, and the difference of that of whenever they were first found here is that these people are barely clothed in loincloth at best. Instead of wearing Caucasian clothes, or the white man's clothes as they're calling it here and so on. This famous admiral had visited them too, but they call it the John Frum cult. Well, it's actually John from Indiana. And he just showed up and gave them some stuff. And they were all freaking out. And I'm sure communication was difficult. We'll get into them talking about one of these situations and what they recall and the way that it went down here in a few minutes. But you can see how these people have been drastically changed from an islander people that maybe saw an occasional metal bird to realizing that the metal birds have these peoples in it. But in their mind, they think that the white man stole it all from them and that they somehow were supposed to inherit this without not having anything in between. These are a pre-Neolithic people. And in fact, most of these cases, which I've already mentioned, the same exact thing was in effect. And you could say it's variations on a theme of how that came about, but very similar occurrences inside of each other too. Let's continue.
The name John Frum, or Tom Navy, who they claimed had brought cargo to their island during World War II, and whom they identified as being the spiritual entity who would provide cargo to them in the future.
One day at sundown on an empty beach, a man appeared. People were astonished. Those who first saw him said he wore a white man's clothes. He stood some 40 yards away from them, at the water's edge. They couldn't see his face, but he spoke to them, and he spoke in our language.
He always came and stood in the same place, and the people used to wait for him to appear.
So let me insert here real quick before this man gives his speech of how this went down. These people came to the islands beforehand and after and during. But this is their remembering of this event and the way that it went down. The way that he looked, and they've got him out on the shore and everything, and he's fixing to tell you they quit building their houses up in the jungle area and started building them down there on the beach after mimicking another house that had been created there that they were all afraid of. But that changed too. But this cargo cult situation went on in many island groups other than just this one here. This guy now speaks a broken English island dialect that's barely discernible, but the people that have dealt with him for so long really kind of get the idea. That's why we've got to have an interpreter, even though in the background you'll hear him say some words, like they were coming to bring to something.
Lots of people went down to the beach and made houses there. And there were so many houses packed close together by the shore that you couldn't get through. But here, at night, he used to come and talk. Some believed, and some doubted. Most, though, thought him to be real. His name was John From.
And that's really, again, based on John from where? John from Alabama, John from Indiana. On one of these islands, on another video, not this one, whenever they talk to the people, they say that, and they're like, yeah, like they were just certain of it. They've heard that before. But this had happened so long ago, somebody like this man right here that you're looking at might have been alive in the 40s during the war and seen this thing happen. But that old man that we saw earlier that looked like he was the captain of the army mimicking an army sergeant type wear and so on, real old elder, that guy is probably one of the only people in the village that have any remembrance of this happening. And he probably in his mind knows that this has been twisted into something else, but it's become so much. And he's a big part of it. If they didn't come back for a long time, what type of tales would start to be woven about this and so on, and the white man came and stole our stuff? Here you'll listen to this man kind of botch an American song that he learned during this time, or that they still pass on during this time, but you'll tell that he messes it up, and he also forgets during one point. Let's check it out.
God bless America, land that I love. Can behold her and guide her through the night. With the land roam about, to the berries, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Well, America's not actually his home. In fact, to this day, it's quite probable he has no idea where it is or where he is in relation to it and so on. But here we have one of their huts has been built into a major building here for it's the John From movement headquarters. Not spelled right, but that's okay.
John's words to our big men were clear. He said to them, "For many years you have been ignorant of the world. You don't know anything about the countries of the world. But I, John, know them." John said, "There are many nations of the world, but you shouldn't have faith in any of the others. Only America is your friend. Only America. Remember that. One day America will come and help you again."
There's that old man again over there to his right. But he speaks correctly straight out to you. You didn't know anything about the world or anything else, and then all of a sudden you've got this idea. His shirt has U.S. Army written on it. He's got some fake medals. So does the old man there, all dressed up in his, daily dress up. It's kind of odd something like this could happen. Quite often I'll think about this, and I think about some of the shows, which is the reason that they did it in old Star Trek, whenever they showed up at primitive islands and weren't supposed to, or primitive worlds, and weren't supposed to mess with the people, or supposed to change or interact too much, but maybe give them a one-up, or at least a help if they need to, or so on. And one wonders if we're not a product of cargo cult and Caucasians too, but that's for a total different video. But in doing so, you'll be able to look at this situation and how it came across, and then there's another level above that. These primitive people have now taken to the idea that they love America because of us coming through during World War II and having a chance meeting somewhat, and it almost seems like we owe them. It almost seems like to make Santa Claus seem real for these people, we need to go and drop them stuff. But if you start, you won't ever be able to stop, and you'll have to keep playing Santa Claus forever for these people. That goes in effect for these people, but it goes in effect for others too, if you follow me. Let's continue.
Once John called all the people together and he said, "You really have a lot of trouble having to go so far for all the things that you need. But one day, everything will come right through to this place, and you won't have to do so much hard work. There will be roads so that trucks can come right through, and there'll be a store here for you."
That's strange. They're just going to make a country store right there and put in the 7-Eleven and roads and everything for them. Well, who's going to do this? Oh, John Frum and his magic people. Oh, I hope he didn't really tell them that, but they inferred that or wanted that so bad to happen that they'd somehow get something special, that they wouldn't have to go so far. For what? Watches and airplanes? You wouldn't be able, they didn't know they existed until that time. And then after, there's this desperate greed and want for things like that. And it kind of screws up a people if you see it here. And if you do it once and leave it alone, it leaves them screwed up like this, but then they're forever screwed and their gods have left them behind. But then what do? Do you play Santa Claus? Down in the comments, let me know what y'all think should actually happen in versions like that. Maybe it's different than what we have done. Oh, sure, it should have never happened. Well, World War II should have never happened either, and all the things that go on with that. But once something like that happens, we have to just get past that point, don't we? Let's continue.
And one day, you'll have houses all made of corrugated iron to sleep in. He promised everything, and our fathers really didn't believe that this would happen, as there wasn't a road at that time, and they couldn't understand how all these things would come true, because at that time, it was very, very hard for them to earn money. So they doubted him. But finally, they thought about it and said, yes, this is a man who is telling the truth.
Actually, he's talking about earning money, that they didn't know the concept of money existed before then, too. Money's another superficial thing that means something else that we do. It's a strange thing where you're not trading beads or anything anymore. And you're not just doing things back and forth that get way out of hand and you never keep up with it quite. And then maybe get into a big fight about the fact that you owe me one more fish than I... No, whatever. But you can see that these people now are not wearing loincloths. The ladies are clothed. And it's been quite a difference for them. This is just one of their elders that are talking out. One of the guys they thought could do a real good job of talking. If you saw it straightforward, it'll seem like a bunch of broken English gibberish.
Why didn't we have me tell him?
And John said to us, he said, I, John, I am the road to Jesus. I am preparing the road to Jesus. I am the road.
I sure hope it wasn't stated exactly like that. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. And this has been something that's boiled up and inferred inside themselves after which fact. But you can tell it also has something to do with Christianity and stuff. But you can look at this very primitive looking woman here. You can also see in the background there, they've got a Jesus that's the color of them and not the color of these white people. But he does have blonde hair somehow. He's on a pink cross.
Some people criticize us, and they say that we've waited a long time for John's promises. Too long. But this is exactly like the Bible. You go to church, you pray, and those things you ask for, they don't come easy. But John, he promised two specific things. He said that one day the Americans would come, and we know that they did come. So we know he's telling the truth. And John also says, if you obey my orders, I will come again.
Probably those of us listening might have enough understanding to realize that John Frum that they're speaking directly about has died decades ago. But he's not going to come back. And they have this ulterior Jesus situation going on. And I'm sure John Frum wasn't a black man. In fact, they'll let you know it's not. But what happens here? Well, this is the type of thing that happens off of that. Suddenly, this person's grandparents were a Bushman type, extremely low IQ, living in huts at best going on. And whenever these people landed during World War II, which is right there behind us, and this exposure has them conjuring up all kinds of things, and they hope that John's coming back. Well, I guess it could be faked somehow, you see, because Santa Claus just wears an outfit, and there's nobody alive that really saw him before, and I'm not sure if that old man can really see or not, or if there's anybody that looked at remotely like him that he would agree upon that it's probably him. If we were to go and drop cargo again and stuff, it's expected. But it's not from the white people, you see. We're going to be giving them stuff from Santa Claus, which is their own ancestors. Which if we give them what stuff from 2 generations ago, they don't even have bifacial blade technology or anything, people. There is no technology, compass, there's nothing you can think of that they possibly even had whatsoever. And so this being a great thing has become a religion, as Robert said earlier, to these people. Again, these are shows that used to be shown on National Geographic and so on, but due to the fact that it doesn't show them in the most favorable of light, it used to be the one that caused the people to want to do something for these people. But now it's just kind of ignored. But one thing's for sure, they're still getting new clothes from somewhere. Let's continue.
Time where it come. From me, black man.
Now, I'm a black man, and I honor this eagle. All of us from this island honor this eagle.
Long time a high pitch and blow me eagle.
In America, they honor it.
He says in America they honor the eagle, and then he points behind him. Behind him is a picture of Queen Elizabeth and her husband. The last time I did something about a cargo cult was whenever he'd passed away, because those people worshipped him as though he was Jesus, like this John Frum character, for them and going to help them out. And whenever they found out he died, it freaked these people out because they had become a cult on him. Kind of like Elvis or something, but no, it's him. It's the Jesus of us. In fact, over here is another picture of him and a younger picture of him. Well, I can't tell who's in the orangish type frame, but that's a picture of him above. And again, there with Queen Elizabeth, who again passed away not too long ago. But he's got this coin with an eagle on it, and he's got to do with America. So let's take a look at that if they'll show
This
it.
eagle. We're the same.
We're the same. Well, no, that's an English coin, I think, and it's got a crown on the top of it. And what he's calling an eagle there is actually a goose or a duck, which is part of Caucasian folklore, mythology, and da-da-da, going way back and containing things like Mother Goose and so on. I've done other videos about. But that's an English coin there with the crown on it. And so he's saying it's America, but now what else does he say?
That's why one day we'll be part of America.
Yes, one day Mumbai.
One day they're going to be part of America. You think we're going to stretch out that far with it? Do you think we should because of what happened in World War II? That's why we're real careful nowadays about this type of thing, because it gets this going, and then all of a sudden, as you can tell from what's been stated already, there's this weird want and craving for him to come back and bring us a bunch of cool stuff, but also a resentment that you had somehow stole that from our ancestors. And you can see that in a modern day woke culture a whole lot, where they try to claim they used to be the Egyptians and that everybody got everything from them, to the point that they've even come on my videos and told us that they taught us how to bathe, which all of which is extremely opposite. Some people think of it as a flinching maneuver, where they're trying to do something to rationalize in their mind how this all went down. Never giving credit for the Caucasians that did everything, that they sit and wait to hopefully do more.
Way down upon the swing.
They also sang this song, Way Down Upon the Swinging River. I'll try and play that one.
Way down upon the swinging river, far, far away. That's where my heart is turning level, far from the old folks at home.
The made-up mythology and fantasy of the cargo cults also turns up as a phenomenon in modern Western woke culture.
Yes, it does. And exactly as we were talking about the Egyptians. Well, I don't know if you've seen Egyptian art, probably most of you have, where they show pale women and red ochre colored males. In reality, a male will be more tanned than a woman, and the women are kept very pale. And it was a sign of agriculture, civilization, and so on, that they didn't have to toil so much and could raise the family and so on. It is so far removed from these primitive people who don't have any sexual dimorphism as far as color goes, or a lot in their phenotype actually, where they try to claim some civilization that they actually didn't know existed. But let Robert tell you about it here real quick.
Which is in denial about the reality of how agricultural civilization was diffused around the world during the Holocene, and instead makes up a fake alternative history which is exploited to push a political agenda. For example, Netflix this week announced that it'll be depicting Cleopatra as sub-Saharan African, when she's obviously white, of Macedonian descent, as were all of the Ptolemy rulers.
Sorry, I broke it a minute ago, but yeah, and so the strange thing too is that they're not even trying to take somebody who is Nilotic, like a Nubian, who are not related whatsoever to the Bantu or West Africans, by the way, and didn't really know each other existed pretty much. Known fact. But instead they take a Bantu girl because that's there, and due to jealousy and these feelings or so on, they end up making shows like this, or where Hannibal Barca is black, or they start claiming things like Beethoven was black, or Queen Anne Boleyn was black. And if you want to see something silly, they'll make a Netflix show about it with race swapping just to try to appease them somehow. But it's just causing a problem because it's trying to make Santa Claus come down that chimney again for a desperate lie, where you're trying to believe that, you know, you didn't used to be West Sub-Saharans just in the Congo and didn't know the world existed, just like these island people here. Somehow you were all over the place. In fact, you were queens and shit, which is really so many times throughout the years here, I've had people get on and tell me that Cleopatra was black because they like that name. Whitey Cracker, I hate you. Effectively. And it's sad to know that for sure we're positive of that. But it gets worse. We'll take a look at that here in just a second. And the fact that she's shown as somewhat auburn hair here in this picture that's gone on. But what about other Egyptians? What about before?
Lived in Egypt. Ptolemy was a general of Alexander the Great, who became ruler of Egypt around 300 BC, and his dynasty lasted until Cleopatra's demise and the start of the Roman period around 30 AD. That said, the further one goes back into antiquity, the more fair, meaning
the more what we would call light-haired, light-skinned, Nordic, and so on. It gets much worse than this. In the far left-hand corner there is Seti, which is shown to have red hair, but Seth is originally said to have been a redhead, and apparently that goes back to Seth Peribsen, the founder of the second dynasty, or the second pharaoh of Egypt, his second term, way back when. But you can also find Ginger, the blonde-haired Ghibelline mummy in the pre-dynastic times through here. And there are so many finds. I used to have a list of how many tombs were shown with redheads or blondes in it. If anybody remembers, it was 170 different tombs. Well, secret to that is some of those is west wall, east wall, north wall. Ha ha ha. They're on all three walls of this one, but 170 tombs contain them in there. So almost a half of the tombs that could be listed. And all the queens and pharaohs and so on. The bottom left, you can barely see it here, but that's Whyte. Next to her in the middle bottom is Whyte. This is the grandparents of Tutankhamun, along with Akhenaten and Tai, which is in your top right-hand corner here. And they try to say stuff about their statue all the time. It's crazy how they mention that, or the nose broken off or something, and go, well, okay, here's 3 other statues the nose aren't broke off of. What do you think now? Oh, that's made up somehow. Not your little lie. Did West Sub-Saharans even know Egypt existed? No. Well, why did they say we? It's this problem. And it's through this idea that's a myriad of different things that can go along with its concept of a cargo cult. There are a lot of fair-haired people. Let's just look at Ramses a little bit closer here.
More blonde and ginger the ruling elite becomes. For example, Ramesses the Great was the 19th dynasty pharaoh who reigned over 3,000 years ago. The mummy of Ramesses the Great was forensically tested, and while he did use henna in his old age, microscopic inspection of the roots of Ramesses II's hair proved that the king's hair originally was red, which suggests that he came from a family of redheads.
But he's also a Caucasian, and that's Caucasian hair no matter what. But then you think, okay, well, the people there living now, that's the people that used to live there way back when, and the ruling elite? No, not necessarily. We'll show you a couple of articles by well-known geneticists stating exactly that fact here. But let's look at a few more of these in conjunction here.
Queen Ty, the great royal wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, mother of Pharaoh Akhenaten, and grandmother of King Tut, was also a redhead, as can clearly be seen here using a CT scan. DNA results of Takubuti, the famous 2,600-year-old ancient Egyptian mummy on display at the Ulster Museum, shows that her DNA is more genetically similar to Europeans than modern Egyptian populations.
Caught it right between pictures here, but you can see her blonde hair also, so that's just one more of that. But you see her dark skin. Let me explain it a few ways to you to where you can understand it easy. You know how pink beef is whenever you cut slices of meat and everything and just call it raw? And then you put those slabs out on sticks and let it dehydrate and become beef jerky. And look how dark it becomes when somebody gets the moisture sucked out of them and dehydrated. You get that effect. But don't know, that's not the reason that they have that darker appearance. That would just be a darkish reddish brown. What they actually have is bitumen and tar that's been wiped over them like a black lacquer. Bitumen and tar. And the tar is made from European pines. That my last knowledge of this, they were trying to discern which area the pines had come from, but I'm in the belief that it came up from the forest of Lebanon or above in that area, but it may have actually come from way over in Western Europe, where they did have contact back then, and there are connections to the Irish and Scottish and so on that I'm not going to go into here. But let's look at this statement here that's shown.
The DNA results are published in Nature Communications. Scientists obtained DNA from 90 individual mummies dating back up to 3,400 years ago.
This was just a couple of years ago that came out, and a lot of us said this is the nail in the coffin for that stuff. We're not going to hear it anymore. But then what blew people away was that they kept trying to pander at this point and say, well, the Egyptians are the same as they always were. And it's like, no, not really. When I did a genetic testing to them, they said the ancient Egyptians were more closely related to Europeans than modern Egyptians are. In the statement before this, they actually say that
90 individual mummies.
Egyptian mummies have European and Turkish DNA, but in the paper, they do want to explain that what they're talking about is ancient Anatolians and not the Turkish people that are there now. But ancient Anatolians and Europeans have the closest connection genetically. So when people start mouthing off and they have all this, oh, you're just making up stuff, oh, this is white superiority, this, that, and the other. If you look at the reality of things, no one's really been going around bragging too much about the reality of everything, but this is the reality of that fact. That it happened
back up to 30.
Much more different than thought. Now, this is just one necropolis here, and so they did leave some little out there could possibly be on this, that there are other graveyards and something could be done or whatever, but hey, the biggest necropolis they've been opening up here has been done by Brigham Young for over 20 years now, and they've uncovered millions, or in the process of uncovering millions of these tombs that are through. But one thing that was found neat about them is that all the dark-haired people are all in one area, and then there's a whole lot of blonde people all over in this area, and then redheads are all over in this area, and they're separated by hair color. That's kind of odd, and it's how the bodies seem to cluster around famous people that are buried in their own little place in the mausoleum, and then I want to have my tombstone as close to Marilyn Monroe or Jim Morrison that I can, or so on what. But make no bones about it, the ancient Egyptians were mostly related to Europeans than modern Egyptians say. They said that they have about a 1% connection, and the sad thing for sub-Saharan Africans is the reason that the geneticist points out to it is the reason that they're different now and don't have that connection is they all have an admix from sub-Saharan slave trade from these Bantu type people that didn't exist there before in any way, shape, or form, i.e. the people that keep claiming we were the Egyptians were the reason that these people aren't the Egyptians now, and it's just their slight bit of admix that's in it. What were they really like? Well, they were closely related to the Europeans. And you can see that easily when you start looking at all the hair color that you probably didn't think existed. Hey, when somebody wears a wig, nowadays it's a fad to have a blonde wig. Blondes have more fun, and all this stuff, right? To have blonde wigs. If you had a wig whatsoever, as a white person, as a black person, that's still a fad to have Caucasian hair and Caucasian colors, by the way. But wigs that they did back then was ceremonial. They were all doing dark-haired wigs, and they went through that. But we've seen a lot of wigs. I did a video even on it that it shows, hey, here's these wigs that are mixed with blonde and darker hair and so on, and here's one that's light and then dark and has that little faux effect onto it. Here's this one with these gold clasps all over it. It's quite interesting, but there's no black people hair in any of that. No, there's not. But we have that issue here, and the reason I'm showing you this together, and the reason probably Robert did too, is that this is evidence of a cargo cult and a flinching, and then trying to claim that this was your ancestors somehow. Let's continue.
3,400 years ago, conducting full genome sequences of ancient Egyptians for the first time, concluding that the ancient Egyptian nobility and pharaohs were more closely related to modern Europeans and inhabitants of the Near East rather than present-day Egyptians. Now, keep in mind that the ancient Near East demographics may not exactly match modern populations, a concept that many people struggle with. Ancient is not the same as today or modern. That goes for India, China, the Americas, and of course, ancient Egypt.
So I've showed variations of this picture before. The left two rows are ancient Egyptians from the earliest of dynasties, except for the one there in the center of it, where she still has one blue eye left. But these are the ancient Egyptians and how they depicted themselves. But then we also have Sumer and Akkad here, and the way that they did themselves, and the ancient Minoans, and they're showing blue eyes and their connectives and so on. And then there's also statues all over the world, including Buddha and so on. But let's go back here for a second and talk about, they talk about in genetics that all blue-eyed people probably related to a person around 10,000 years ago and then spread out from an area around the Black Sea, which is also where Noah's Ark was supposedly landed and so on, and the idea. And then the reason the Caucasus Mountains are called the Caucasus Mountains in the first place that are there. Well, where did they spread out? Well, the map that Robert showed earlier, talking about Aryan, showed that they spread all the way down. They don't make a fingerling shot right into ancient Egypt, but these blue-eyed Egyptians here that are over here, there's hundreds of them that can be shown. And then you can also look at reserve heads and so on. And then you could look at what they said about the only black people that they knew existed as Nubians. Now they call them vile troglodytes, and they weren't allowed into Egypt for a reason. And now we're back at that fence again, and that idea and the way a cargo cult went on with Egypt, with them. And you can look up viceroys of Kush and find out much later, about the time when we were talking about Ramses and through that, that we ended up having them ruled over by the Egyptians in a secondary way. What good did that do? If you look at the Nubians nowadays, there are still tribal portions of that, and it never really got totally going. The blacks in America are really entitled in a way that's strange to any of this, because they actually never had to go through the waiting at the fence. Well, they did. From Aslar Man, who was the first admixed black, where he had a vaulted cranium, at 4400 BC, they had to wait till then, till the Bantu expansion and so on, and then being found by Islamic slavers and all of that goes on, if you will. But in that same endeavor, they didn't really have to go through all of this, but one wonders what it was really like once the point of first initial meeting that went on with that idea, and how one became basically their king for a while and interbred with their women. Anything before Hasselar-Man at 4400 BC found anywhere in the area is a still extant, small-brained Homo erectus type of form. And so they're a hybrid of that. And genetics has also came to prove that they have up to 19% of their DNA and no one else on the planet has. And they call it an archaic ghost species because it's not existing. They don't have it collected as anybody's DNA, but it's still a Homo erectus type of form. So a hominid. About 19% of their DNA up to it. But of course that gets taken away more and more as they get more and more admix and so on that goes on there. And that's about enough on the Egyptians, I would guess. Here I could go on for hours if you've seen my other videos, but let's just continue.
All the while I'm sad and weary, everywhere I roam. Oh, dark is summer grows weary, far from the old folks at home.
So there's Robert again over there near it. But so what we have here is what you can basically glean in a short video, 45 minutes or around, and an idea and concept of cargo cults and how when a primitive people met someone extremely advanced, and you could say it was that way at World War II and so on that went on, but it's always been that way. From ancient India and its blend north to south, to these original island people long, long ago, to the Chinese and Oriental type people, to Russia and all the way through, and basically everything of the ancient world except for other people were pushed to the edges. But they weren't pushed. It's just where they were. Just where they formed something different. But cargo cults is one way to explain the flinch that black people in America have in a modern day, trying to claim that they were this and they were that. And it's the same type of thing where, you know, something's supposed to happen and our ancestors were supposed to have done something, and you hear this repeatedly by them and you know that it didn't happen, and it makes you feel bad as a white person knowing that, man, it didn't even happen and all you're doing is jealously lying, and they can't quit because it's kind of stuck in him. And if you think it's alone with the black people in America, it's not. Here's a showing of islanders doing it. The Aborigines of Australia did it. People of South India did it, and so on. And it still goes on today. Let me know what you think below, and we'll get on to another topic. Peace.